Hey guys, hey, thanks for joining today. Today, this is actually going to be part one of a three-part series that, I kind of plan on doing, and it's a little bit different from the general, relationship type, kind of psychology videos I do. And what I really want to start out with and talk about today is our shadow archetype. Okay, and with that, I'm referring to Carl Jung. It had been discussed earlier, in other videos that we have our ego, our super ego, and our id. Okay, and that was, something with Sigmund Freud. But basically, I just want to go ahead and jump right into it. Just, sort of like an intro, kind of a background, because the next video is going to go ahead and be, dark psychology intertwined with predatory nature, predatory behavior. So I feel like, if I can just give you a little bit of background, it's, you kind of understand a little bit more, where I'm going with it. But basically, it's important because everybody has a shadow. And basically, I'm going to jump right in and let's talk about it. So, okay, what is the shadow? Okay, basically, the shadow is our unconscious portion of our personality, and this tends to be, the part of our personality, the darker portion, maybe that we do not consciously, which is our ego, identify with. Basically, like I said, it's the dark portion, the dark side of ourselves. And basically, as human nature, we tend to reject or, ignore or downplay, our least desirable aspects, in our personality, maybe things that, we kind of don't, like about ourselves, or maybe that's, deep down that, we know what kind of person we really are, and we're kind of ashamed of it, that sort of thing. But basically, the shadow can be positive or negative, but mostly it is largely negative, and with that, its entirety is completely made up of the unconscious. So obviously, the shadow is going to be the id portion. And with that, like I said, it's everything that we are unconscious of. Basically, to know oneself is to accept the dark side. Accept, all portions, all aspects, of yourself. Possible aspects, of a personality that can be hidden, especially like if you have low self-esteem, false beliefs, anxieties, and things like that. The shadow tends to be a little bit darker, a little more dense, kind of thing. But basically, like I said, the shadow can be positive or negative. Everyone carries a shadow. Everybody has a dark side. In this, I cannot stress enough. Basically, the more you deny your darker side, the stronger it gets. Okay. And basically, it's just the unconscious self, the id, sort of, it starts early in childhood, because it's kind of like the ego, where the ego's constantly changing with new experiences and things like that. But basically, like I said, shadow is an unknown dark side of your personality. It is seen as instinctive but also irrational. So, I mean, it's a little messed up there. But also, we are prone to psychological projections. And with that, I mean our personal inferiority, moral deficiencies, things that we dislike in other people is generally the shadow portion of ourself. So it's kind of like attracts like. I love that saying. But basically the projections remain. And the projections, I like to call this the veil between our ego, our conscious self, and the real world. Okay, so it's kind of like, you can't, like if you ever think of a, bride, and and they're wearing the veil, that right there is our projections. Those are, it's the difference between our conscious self and reality. So it's pretty interesting. But basically, the shadow is generally seen as like the seat of creativity. It tends to be more sinister side, and I really like that word because each and every person has the potential to be good or bad. On the inside. I'm going to go into that a little bit later, though. Okay, so let's talk about the appearance of the shadow. The shadow tends to appear a lot of times, in someone's dreams as like the same sex. Like, let's say hypothetically, I had a dream and I met, this female. A lot of times that could be the first, initial encounter with the shadow side. And with that, the appearance, it largely depends on the experiences of each individual, because everybody's shadow is different. No two are the same. And with that, you also need to keep in mind that the shadow, as it's developing and being developed, and even when it starts to develop, it's only developed in the mind. In the unconscious portion, it is not something that you're aware of and you say, okay, well, I'm going to be an asshole and, whatever. Like you were unconsciously aware of it. Okay. And basically, instead of it just being there, it's developed not only in the mind, but like I said, the unconscious mind, which is also called the collective unconscious. We'll get to that later too. Basically, your id, your shadow, is fed by neglected and repressed negative experiences, anything negative collectively, value-wise, that you have experienced or learned, or, maybe repressed or held in. This is what feeds your shadow side. Okay. And so basically, interactions with the shadow, in your dream is also said to, it sort of sheds light on someone's mental state, and like their state of mind and things like that, which I think is very, very interesting. Conversation with the shadow may, indicate your, deeper desires or, conflicting ideas or views, or just, something that's maybe a little unsettling to you that you can't quite put a finger on it, but it's bothering you, kind of thing. But the shadow is often, can often be mistaken too for, a different type of complex as well. Maybe, if someone is schizophrenic or paranoid schizophrenic, that sort of thing. Borderline personality disorder, psychosis is another common, problem as well. That tends to kind of get confused with the shadow, but either way, the shadow is still there. So it's a little bit harder to identify. But basically, I think of the shadow as an onion. Okay, it's got multiple layers. So that first layer, the top layer is, it's the meaningful, it's our flow and our manifestations of our direct experiences and things that we've experienced, things that are happening to us or manifestations. These are things that affect our shadow, and it changes things inside of our minds, such as our, forgetfulness, or our lack of attention, or, repression of certain memories, things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and go on. The next layer, your second layer, is your archetype. Okay, now this is what I like to call your psychic content of all human experiences. And I don't mean psychic as in, fortune telling, things like that. I mean psychic as in psyche. Okay, which, we had discussed earlier in another video. Everything that composes you as a person, that is constantly, changing and updating. Only certain portions, your id, your, shadow, we repress. So, basically all these, psychic activities, they go on independently of the ego, of the conscious mind. Okay. They are not dependent on the conscious mind, the upper layers, the first layer, the onion, they're not dependent upon that. I mean, and as I said, this is something that is happening inside of your mind privately, even that you're unaware of. Okay. The bottom layer, which we had just discussed, is known as the collective unconscious. Okay. So basically I'm going to go ahead and lead into our encounter with the shadow. And I can't stress this enough. This is the most important aspect of the shadow archetype, okay? And the reason I say this is because the eventual, it will happen, the eventual encounter with our shadow archetype plays the most critical and crucial role in individuation. So as we are, changing as a person and changing as an individual, each and every person, this encounter with our shadow plays a huge part. That is a part of us. Okay, and so that first stage, usually, stems from, maybe someone who, is suffering or, of extreme boredom, or who is sad, or, has repressed memories. A lot of times, like I often refer to, people that have been incarcerated, or, prison time. They have nothing but time to think. And generally your mind, if your mind is not strong, your mind has to be stimulated. So, when you're kind of, just going along with it and you don't really kind of know what's going on, and then you start to feel sad or ashamed, or, all these kind of feelings, and you don't really know why, you're feeling this way. But basically it's the initial encounter with the dark side of yourself. Okay. Basically I like to say that this is the descent into one's own darkness. Okay. Basically, during this time, the disillusionment, the disillusion of your persona, who are you are portraying to be, this sort of sets in motion at that time. And basically the shadow, it personifies everything that we, as we know, for each and every person, everything that we as a person refuse to acknowledge, because we don't really like the bad parts, you know what I'm saying, kind of thing. So that is very important. You know, I would also take note of that. And then also, when we attempt to make this interaction, or, you know, this, when we first see, you know, this shadow, we become, as I said earlier, aware, but we also kind of become ashamed of these negative qualities about ourselves. And I think that's understandable. I think, you know, everyone would agree with that. You know, these negative impulses that we have, and, you know, and desires that we deny in ourselves, we then begin to see those in others. So if you've ever been around somebody maybe, and, you know, something that just really irks you about them, maybe they talk too much, or they're, you know, click, 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 or, you know, they're just an egoistic, a hateful person, it's really a reflection of ourselves. Like I said earlier, you know, like tends to attract like. But basically, you know, the examples of that would be selfishness, you know, carelessness, greed, cowardice, you know, egoism. Okay, a disillusion of the persona launches your individual process in, and I say this because if you do not identify with your shadow, you can fall victim to your shadow. And where I'm going with this is, a lot of people have probably heard of the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Well, there's a quote in that story that says, you know, everybody has good and evil, and whichever we want to be most, we are. Okay, so I'm getting ready to go into that too, but basically it's like, it's inferiority, hidden aspects, you know, of our personality. At this point, they begin to merge. Okay, so the ego, you know, our conscious self, and then our shadow, our id, are starting to come together. It's kind of woven. I like that word a lot. But basically, we're going to go ahead and move on to the merger of the shadow. Basically, when this starts to happen, this can overwhelm a person. You know, and basically, it's kind of like you fall into your own mind traps, which, you know, as I was saying earlier, you know, kind of, you know, you have to be mentally strong. Basically, Jekyll, I like this analogy. Dr. Jekyll, that's your conscious personality, your ego, okay? Hyde is his shadow. It's his dark side, okay? And basically, I cannot stress this enough right here. The conscious, our ego, Dr. Jekyll, integrates Mr. Hyde, the shadow, our id, okay? And not the other way around. So consciously, we integrate this instead of unconsciously. Had we done this unconsciously, we would become a slave to our shadow. So that's a very, very, very important, you know, point right there. I cannot stress that enough. That is very, very, very important. Basically, the ego and the shadow, they come together. They are no longer, you know, divided, but they are brought together. And basically, no one should deny the danger of the descent, because basically after that follows the ascent. During this time, you know, your shadow portion, your bad side becomes real. And it becomes, you know, a very real possibility, and you're like, oh my gosh, you know, and you kind of get overwhelmed and things like that. But basically, when our shadow is recognized and integrated with our good side, our ego, our conscious self, this becomes the center of our individual quest for our inner self as a person. Okay, accepting one's shadow, I like to say it's kind of like doing your dirty laundry in private. Okay, just a couple other tips here before, you know, I begin to wrap this up. Dark sides, basically, they are a part of who we are. Everybody has a dark side. Doesn't matter who you are, okay? Basically, every trait and emotion you possess, good or bad, helps to enlighten yourself. If we do not own a part of ourselves, you know, it can run our life. And then, you know, a lot of times we, you know, find that, you know, we're starting to become people we don't even recognize, you know, because we are trying to prove our worth, our value, that sort of thing. Basically, you know, just to help you uncover your dark side, pay attention to traits that bother you in others. Okay, that's a start right there. Embrace your shadow side and let the dark coexist with the light, because really that's what makes us whole. That's what makes us human, our good and our bad together. We are not just one, we are two. Okay, and basically, you know, that just makes us human. But that's kind of, you know, where I wanted to go with that as far as like the good and bad. The next video is going to be, like I said, you know, with the dark psychology. So I figured a little bit of background would help. But as always, you guys, thank you for watching and tuning in to the discussion. And if you would, join me next time, and we're going to have a great discussion on dark psychology and then predatory behavior. All right, bye guys.